Good evening. Hello. Everyone has a place to sit. Okay. Could you see the whole screen for those of you online? Do you see the whole screen, or what are you seeing? So if just you could confirm with me for those online if you could see, not the whole. Could you see where it says no notes, or do you see only the screen, only the PowerPoint? Okay, let's go. Let's begin. Good evening. Hello. Do you have a book? Want to use the book? Okay, we're going to use. Okay, so tonight, once again, a reminder. Tonight, explain that. Okay, today's our topic is mourning. Now, we have touched on a lot of this last week, but today we're going to delve into it from just more of a perspective of the person that's actually going through the motions. So less focus on the soul, like we did in previous weeks, and the deceased, more focused on the people that are over here present. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to start lesson 3, which is on page. Sorry, did somebody find the page already? 83. Okay. Grief spectrum. Once again, a reminder, today's learning is dedicated this way. I know there's no trouble. If you're going to talk, you're going to have to pass notes across the whole room. Good, smart move. There you go. So tonight's lesson is dedicated, as all these lessons are, to the memory of Noach ben Abu Leib, that encouraged and pushed for a lot of Torah learning in our community, and he's still continuing to do that. And may this be a blessing to his neshama and his family. Okay. Yes. The mourning. So we're going to talk about that very topic today. Now, when we talk about mourning, we spoke about a bit of it in a theoretical sense. Today, we're going to get much more practical when it comes to the actual concept of mourning. So it could be both last week and this week are, but they could be difficult subjects at times. So, we're talking about the practical, the joke of the practical. The joke of the practical, there's a few jokes, I think, when we think about getting practical. One is about the guy that's doing a tightrope between the twin towers, between the one twin tower and the other twin tower. And everyone's out there screaming, and he walks across, and everyone says, he turns to everyone down there. No one could hear him that high, but anyway, pretend they could. And he says, who would like me to do it again? He said, yeah, does it again. He says, okay, who would like me to do it with a wheelbarrow? Everyone says, yeah, you think I can do it? Sure, you definitely can do it. He goes across, back and forth with the wheelbarrow. And then he turns to the crowd and he says, now who would like to come in my wheelbarrow? So he turns to the guy, you were the one that said I could do it, you should come. And the guy says, maybe not so quickly. So when it comes to talking about things theoretically, I want to say that thank God I haven't really truly lost I've lost grandparents. I've lost, I was a close friend of mine. I've lost close friends. I've never lost a real next of kin. So if I'm being a bit unsensitive at times, I apologize in advance. And I don't think in life, and you don't truly understand things until you've properly experienced them yourself. But my job as a rabbi is to be there for people, whether I've gone through their experience or not, and to try to empathize with people. And that's also our job as people. And that's what we're going to discuss tonight. So if you want to, in a nutshell, what we're going to discuss is how to go through the mourning period, how to practice it, what's the benefits of the mourning period. It's less about for the spiritual ideas, more about and what halacha says about all these things. Okay, so let's focus on on the Jewish way of how to mourn. Now, when we talk about the Jewish way of how to mourn, the truth is that everybody mourns differently, and we certainly shouldn't be judging people and how people handle loss. But sometimes, while we're not going to judge people, but sometimes there's things we can do that could prepare ourselves or could put things in perspective for ourselves, that when, if God forbid we do go through a loss or we have been through a loss, it can help us, right? And you could see this quite clearly by, you know, the people that have famous losses, you know, people that God forbid lose their children in terrorist attacks. And you see sometimes people handling it very different, and often it's based on the background and how they come. And it's, you think about it, why is that? And often the answer is because of their mindset allows them to process it very differently. Shalom, shalom. Hello. Okay, so let's look at page 84, text number 1. Once again, I apologize that I'll be doing all the readings just so that the people can hear us on in person. And what we're going to read is 2 different stories. Just in case you don't have the text in front of you, it's about 2 stories of 2 individuals that lost somebody, one of their loved ones, and how they handled it. Okay, Heather Lindquist was in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch when she heard a dull thud. It sounded as if it came from the hallway, and it was just a little too loud to ignore. "Boys," she yelled, "what are you up to?" There was no answer. She found her 2 boys playing quietly on the couch in the living room. They giggled. "You jokers," she said with a smile. "What was that sound?" They shrugged. "Where is your father?" Without waiting for an answer, she ran toward the hallway. She cried out in fear when she found her husband, John, writhing on the floor. John had severe asthma. He was taking a new medication, and it had seemed to be working, but suddenly he had collapsed in the worst attack he'd ever had. Heather tried everything she could think of to save her husband's life. Then she called an ambulance. The rest was a blur. John died of cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. Heather was 34 years old. Her boys were 5 and 7. At that moment, John's death felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to her. Heather Lindquist had lived her entire life in the same quiet suburban community in northern New Jersey. She and John had been high school sweethearts. They married and purchased a small ranch-style house. They had children. They got a dog. The schools were good, and the community was stable. Heather thought that the television was on more than it should be, but other than that, everything seemed in order. Then John died, and she had to rethink it all. Now she was a single parent. She had to find new ways to earn money and also find extra time to be with her boys. And somehow she had to contain everyone's anguish. She found strength she didn't know she had. It was lonely and painful at times, but Heather found meaning and vigor and even joy in the idea that she was going to make it. I expected to collapse. I really did. That was what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do. That would have been the easiest thing to do, Heather explained, but I couldn't. Each day I got up and did what I had to do. The days passed and some it was okay. The boys were great. They were upset in the beginning, of course. We all were. They hung in there and we stayed together. I love those boys so much. John would have been proud of them. Okay. Now we're going to contrast this with another story. Now, every single person would have a different story, but just taking 2 stories. In 2004, Stephanie Mulberg of Short Hills, New Jersey, lost her son, Eric, 13, to Ewing's sarcoma, a bone cancer. 4 years after Eric's death, Miss Mulberg, now 48, walked around like a zombie. I felt guilty at the time, guilty about living, she said. I couldn't walk into the deli because Eric couldn't go there any longer. I couldn't play golf because Eric couldn't play golf. My life was a mess. And I couldn't talk to my friends about it because after a while, they didn't want to hear about it. Stephanie, you need to get your life back, they'd say. But how could I? On birthdays, I'd shut the door and take the phone off the hook. Eric couldn't have a birthday. Why should I? Okay, so that's the questions that we're going to have. We have 2 people that have experiences. And as I say, any single person in the world will have a separate story about and how they handled loss. But we kind of try to, I suppose they try to compile 2 contrasting stories that kind of speak about people's loss and how they handled it. So the questions we're asking are here. Heather and Stephanie reacted differently to their respective losses. is one response healthier than the other? That's our first question. What do you think is the healthier of the two responses? Is Heather in denial? She seems to move on with her life relatively smoothly, seems. Is Stephanie overacting? Why do the two women react differently? If you know someone who did or did not deal well with loss, what might have made that person equipped or ill-equipped to cope with their grief? So once again, the emphasis is not to judge anybody. Okay, we all deal with things the way what we have to judge, and also with your experiences, your history. There's so much that comes involved in it, but yet the Torah still gives us a certain framework to work with when it comes to loss. So I was just talking to somebody today who happens to be a very religious, is even a big, very knowledgeable rabbi, and he was telling me how he was in an accident, a terrible accident, and he lost his father at a relatively young age, and he was saying how he had PTSD, quite severe PTSD as a result of it. Post-trauma syndrome disorder, which is something that we're seeing more and more. At least we're recognizing that a lot of issues that we have are trauma, and knowing certain things about how we can work with it, what the Torah has put in place. Sometimes, and not always, and there's always, even if you do everything the Torah says, it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. Sometimes you might be able to help. So, you want a book? Okay. All right. So that's where we're starting off from. Recognizing, acknowledging people have different ways of how they look at loss and how they react to it, how people get to it. So not judging anybody once again, but if we want to have a loss, we want to have the healthiest outcome. That's the point. We lose somebody in our family, how could we suffer the least amount of trauma and have the healthiest way of grieving, no denial, yet also coming out on top and being able to move on in a healthy way in our lives. That's the ideal outcome. And the question is, how do you get that? Yes.
Is it possible that it depends on, like when it's a partner, you actually say, okay, it's a rough time, but I have 2 kids that I need to take care of. But if your son's getting I think, I'm not saying it's maybe maybe it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to
Compare. Yeah, 100%.
First of all, hard to compare, and second, like, how do you deal with that you bury your son? It's like absolutely the worst.
Yeah, a 13-year-old child. Yeah, 100%. So that's an important point. The one person had young children that they had to take care of. They had an important mission. We don't know what Stephanie had. It doesn't say anything about Stephanie really. We don't know if maybe move that table. I moved him back. I forgot to move him back. No, I didn't move the table because it was a private. And then you could move your table forward if you want. The circumstances are going to make a big difference, right? If a person has young children that they have to take care of, for example, then they might be forced to get into it. If somebody's lost a child, that could be less severe, more severe. And also the relationship that they have with the person. If they have a spouse that they're very close with, it might be harder, it might be easier, it might, all these type of things definitely play an important role. Yeah, Akiva.
I mean, there are differences, obviously, in terms of the loss, but the responses in Heather's case, it sounds like a mature coping that she doesn't deny her expectation of being devastated and being like feeling collapse. That she also focuses not only on her children, but also on herself. And trying to find joy and trying to, accept the resolve that she's going to make it. Whereas what little we hear about Stephanie is just resigned to misery and not celebrating anything.
Right.
because of the loss. The loss is almost her entire worldview.
Yeah.
Trying to absorb it into their life going forward.
100%. Yeah, very, very well said. So that's where you're looking at. It seems as though, at least from the perspective we have, Heather has a healthier reaction. And once again, there's obviously circumstances which allow for that to be a healthy reaction, but also the personality. There could be things that she's done. So we want to try to find out how could we react to things in a healthy way as well. I don't want to dwell too much on the particular circumstances because, as we say, every circumstance will be totally different, and every loss is totally different. Every relationship is totally different. You know, you have sometimes parents that lose children and they're not even that close to their children. You have sometimes spouses that lose each other and they're not that close, but sometimes it's the opposite. And sometimes the loss of a spouse could be the hardest. Sometimes the loss of the child could be the hardest. And obviously age makes a big difference as well. We'll talk about that later as well. So the question is then, maybe it might seem that what I'm saying is the best and healthiest thing is to move on with your life and don't get too caught up in mourning and doing those type of things. And is that the perspective that we want to take? So let's look at, obviously we're not going to take that perspective, but it's a valid question for numerous reasons, but here's an interesting reason. If you look at text number 3, Socrates, this is supposedly, Socrates lived, we got a bit about him. He lived some 2,500 years ago, and he was the teacher of Plato. And we have a bit of the writings of Plato, and this is maybe Achilles' field, but I'll do the quoting for now. So text 3 on page 87. Socrates instructed. Now, the background behind the story is Socrates was, so to speak, put in court and held in he was judged because, as a philosopher, he was basically going against the accepted knowledge of the time. And people didn't like that. He was challenging ideas and making people think differently. And as a result, he was arrested and held and put in prison. And he was put on what's right? He was judged. He was on trial. Thank you. He was put on trial. That's the word I was looking for. And eventually, he was sentenced to death after a long process. Even some of his colleagues, it's a very interesting way of how they did it back in the days of Athens, the start of democracy, so to speak, or the original democracy and how Western civilization started. But he had opportunities not to escape his death. And what he didn't take those opportunities. Not only that, he tells his students not to be sad for his death, but death is actually something that they should be celebrating. Look inside. He says, Socrates instructed Cebes, please relate the following message to Evenus and bid him be of good cheer. Say that I would have him come after me by immediately leaving this world. In other words, also die if he be a wise man and not tarry. And that today I'm likely to be going, for the Athenians say that I must. In other words, I'm going to die. Simmias said, what a message for such a man. Having been a frequent companion of his, I should say that, as far as I know him, he will never take your advice unless he's obliged. Why, said Socrates? Is not Evenus a philosopher? I think that he is, said Simmias. Then he, or any man who has a spirit of philosophy, will be willing to die. But he will not take his life, for that is held to be unlawful. The day may come when you will understand why, though a man is better dead, he is not permitted to be his own benefactor, but must wait for the hand of another. So what he's saying is, in theory, we should commit suicide, but it's unlawful and it's not the right thing to do. There was actually Greek philosophers that came after him that actually believed that suicide was a healthy thing if you could appreciate it, so to speak. You should eventually end life. Now, based on what we discussed in our first week, we had a similar question first week, which was, if the soul is all the life is come here, so therefore maybe you should want to end your life. And we discussed certain reasons about why Judaism wants us to stay here. But it's an interesting idea where you're seeing that on the one hand, we celebrate a life after a person passes, but we also are supposed to mourn, and we don't really have the same perspective. We don't at all have the same perspective as this philosopher Socrates, but there is an idea of truth that we can acknowledge, that sometimes if we believe that a person goes on and moves on to a happier, more blissful place, like we discussed last week, or the 2 weeks ago, where their soul unleashes all their capabilities, you would think that maybe it is a good thing to die. So if that's the case, why are we even mourning them? That's really the premise of our question. It's almost like a by the way idea. Okay. So the ultimate question therefore becomes Lama litabel. Why should you mourn? Okay. Why do we have mourning in Judaism at all? Why is it an important thing? So let's look inside on text number 4. Text number 4 is actually a quote from Maimonides, from Ramban, and he says straight out, Mitzvat asay, there's a positive commandment from the Torah, litabel ala krovim, to mourn for people, for relatives that have passed away. Okay, so that's from Maimonides. Why is that important? You know, just like it's interesting. In Judaism, we're actually commanded to mourn. And we're going to see. We looked at Shiva briefly last week. Today, we're going to actually delve much more into the mourning process and what's the importance of each stage of the mourning. We're much more, as I said, much more practical today, much more of a basic type of understanding of the halakha today.
Why, by the way, if we're quoting the Mishnah Torah, then we have an actual Torah source for that biblical commandment? How can we take Maimonides' words that it is biblically commanded that he doesn't bring text to demonstrate it?
Okay, so the answer to that question would be, if you looked at Maimonides in that particular source, the laws of mourning, which is the first line of the laws of mourning, when he wrote it, he never actually put in sources, but later on he said he wanted to first write everything down, and if he had time, and then later on the commentaries found sources. We have sources for everything. So if you want after class, we could look it up and see what the source is. But if he says it, then you would understand that there is a source for it. If he says it's a positive commandment, sometimes it will say things like, he'll say it's a rabbinical law, or it's something like that. But when it says mitzvot asay, then you know that he's including it as part of one of the 613 mitzvahs that he has at the beginning. Okay. Now, it's we actually have a day of mourning in Judaism, right? Tisha B'Av, we have 3 weeks of mourning. We actually do mourning on a regular basis, so to speak. So we have the concept of mourning. We have concept times for mourning, times of celebration. We mourn the loss of the temple. But we know that after the temple, we're going to have a greater good, and there's going to be the times of Mashiach. But we still have to mourn the loss. So the Torah wants us to acknowledge a loss, and that's the important point. That's what we're going to see. If you lost something, and you don't acknowledge your loss, even though you can philosophize about how deep down it's better, that's not healthy. You have to also acknowledge the loss and the sadness that you're feeling as well. Okay. So let's look at text 5a. This is from Nachmanides. So first we start off with the commandment that we actually have to think. It says the Torah does not forbid us to weep in response to a death. It doesn't forbid us, because it is human nature to be moved to tears when separating from loved ones and at their journeying away, even if they are alive. So he's looking at it from a different perspective. He says you don't have to, the Torah doesn't command you to do something that comes naturally to you. Naturally, all people, whether they're Jewish or not, when they lose a loved one, they cry, they mourn to a certain degree. The Torah wants us to go through a certain process, but to weep is not necessarily a commandment, but you actually go through the process of mourning, we're going to see becomes an important thing. So if you can't cry, sometimes you're transgressing, but here we're going to go a bit further. Look at text 5b, and this is once again going back to Maimonides, but this is his other book, Guide to Perplexed. Mourners find comfort in crying and in arousing their sorrow until their bodies are too weak to handle the intensity of the internal turmoil. Just as happy individuals find contentment in various forms of light-hearted activities. So in other words, what Rambam is saying over here is actually when a person doesn't act, if you're feeling an emotion and you act upon the emotion, it actually can bring you, so either it helps the joy or it helps the sorrow and it helps the comfort. So it actually ultimately brings you comfort. So not holding it in, allowing it to come out, doing an act of it helps you, brings you comfort. When a person holds it in and doesn't do it, it could be harder. Now, this is really a build-up to the next text, which is a text 5c. This is a fascinating text from a guy that we call the Ravid. He was the chief rabbi of Cairo, and then he moved to Tzfat, and he was part of the Beth Din of Rabbi Yosef Karo. And he, for his time, he wrote, we have more questions and answers from him than almost any other rabbis of the time. Probably, there's till the modern era where people started writing and copying and printing much more letters. He was living in the 1500s, and he wrote so much. So we have lots and lots of interesting ideas from him. So the question from him was, one of his generation's greatest personalities failed to shed a single tear upon losing a son. Is this a praiseworthy reaction? This was the question that was asked of the Ravid. What do you think?
It's very unusual.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
Is it?
The answer is very judgmental, and somebody that didn't have no idea.
Sorry, you're saying that the answer is judgmental.
Yeah.
No. So what's the question? No, the question is judgmental. The question is, somebody didn't cry, and why they asked the question? Because whoever asked the question said it wasn't a regular person or was a president. Is in other words, should I also, if God forbid, if I lost or other people lose, should we be encouraging people not to cry? That was the question. Is it a praiseworthy thing? In other words, should other people emulate this act? I know it sounds judgworthy, but the question is.
The answer
Okay, so let's. Okay, so let's. Okay, yeah. So there's a Hebrew part and English part to this thing. That's what's good. Okay, so let's read it and then we'll discuss it, because it's not fair to start discussing something that we haven't actually read. So the answer: such behavior is offensive and objectionable. It demonstrates heartlessness, distasteful character, and cruelty. This is the way of the philosophers who maintained that this world is without purpose. By contrast, we have received the Torah, are expected to believe and to realize that this world is of great value for those who properly utilize their time here and behave appropriately. It is through our actions in this world that we merit the world to come. Crying, mourning, and shedding tears over the passing of a relative, and especially for an honorable individual, is the way of the pious. The prophets and individuals are renowned for their good deeds. It is not for naught that our sages instruct us to observe 3 days for weeping, 7 days, 7 for eulogy, and 30 for restrictions in wearing new clothing and getting haircuts, etc. If weeping were improper, the sages would not have instituted a 3-day weeping period. In fact, the Torah emphasizes that our forefather Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and weep for her, and that Yaakov, King David, and countless individuals of similar character acted likewise. So let me try to clarify what he's trying to say. You're trying to set down, not to judge the particular people, which I suppose the language of it can sound judgmental on the people, but it's trying to ask, what's the tradition? What's the Jewish way, right? What is the correct Jewish way? The correct Jewish way is to say, should we be like philosophers? And like Socrates was saying, let's just don't mourn for me. Celebrate the fact that I'm going to a better place, and don't be upset about it. Don't acknowledge, so to speak, your loss. Is that the Jewish way? Because from one perspective, you could think that is the Jewish way, right? Just go on with life and be happy for that person, etc., etc. That is one perspective. And he says, no, actually, it's not the Jewish perspective. The Jewish perspective is, oh, we are supposed to, the Torah actually commands us to go through a mourning period and to phase and to actually actualize it. So in other words, just in case, for whatever reason, this person, whoever we don't know who it's written about, acted in that way, it shouldn't be a lesson. It's not that judging that individual, we don't know what the circumstances is or what the person did in private, etc., etc. We don't know about it, but for us, we have to know that the healthy path is to mourn, is to cry, and to accept our feelings.
But just like you said in the beginning of the class, everyone mourns different. Just because someone doesn't cry and doesn't show anything outward, doesn't mean that person doesn't mourn.
100%.
So how dare anyone pass judgment based on the appearance?
Well, that's exactly the point. We can't judge the past judgment.
But it sounds very much like a judgment.
No, okay, no. So what it's saying is,
What if there are different ways to deal with it? What we're going to sit and watch how many tears?
no, that's exactly the point.
I don't know.
So this is exactly what I'm saying. You guys are totally, I'm agreeing with both of you 100%. Well, it is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this. And this is what I started the class, is that number one, you don't know what the person's going through. We don't know what so a person could not be crying, a person could not be overreacting, but don't say that that's the right way to do things, and that's the Torah way. The Torah way is that we have a process, which is Shiva, and we're going to go through that process, and we have a particular way of how to do it. Now, if you see a great rabbi and they lose somebody, when my father lost his father, I didn't see many tears, but he went through the process of it. And the Torah is saying, the Torah commands us to go through a certain process, but not to say that this is the way to do things, or that's not the way. There's a process, and that's the idea. I don't think, I think what's underlying all of this, and that's what we made very clear in the whole class, is that there's a Torah way to do things, and we can't judge the way people do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the main problem is just the language. To demonstrate artistry and character. The problem is the language they use. It's not necessarily what they're trying to say, but the language is very.
Yeah. Right.
I just wanted to add, I agree with all that, and I think that's what's so beautiful about keeping the Torah, is it gives you this guide. Because otherwise, some people wouldn't know what to do. Maybe just break down, or not break down, or they're in shock.
If you think we should not
It's not a real thing. It's a
Right.
real thing.
No, we're going to talk about that 100%.
That's right, that's.
Yeah.
You can read it.
But if you think it, you should break down.
Yes.
If
You
I
will.
mean, judgment will come either way. You're breaking down, you're not breaking down, right?
Which is very sensible in offering permission to go through an emotional, feeling or grieving process. What this text is doing, which everyone will agree is it's offering judgment on someone who doesn't exhibit those external characteristics. This text is problematic.
Okay.
The Torah is problematic. This rabbi
Okay.
response, the way it's written, midah ra'ah, it's an evil character. That's about as strong language as I've come across.
It's not.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. So I want
Can you
to.
explain what's midah in Hebrew?
Character,
It's-
midah, or midot, characteristic.
Attributes.
Okay, let me just say this. I don't want to get too caught up in this particular text. I want to say this. I acknowledge
No.
what.
Attributes. Attributes, not character, it's something else.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, let's just can we just go on? Okay. The word, the word is this. Okay, this is the way I understood the. Oh, I shouldn't put on everybody. Why you brought up those of you that brought up the issues with it, and I kind of agree with you on the issues with the terminology, although it was, I suppose, more common in the 1500s. Not that it justifies it, but if you see text from those type of it's more common in today's day and age. We get much more sensitive to this type of writing. That's one thing you should put in perspective. But on the other hand, it's not the point that I'm trying to bring out in this text. Okay. So that's why I want to think what we're trying to bring out in the text. And if you're going to get caught up in the wording that he uses, I understand why they're problematic. I totally understand that. I'm not going to justify that wording because I kind of agree with you. I kind of agree with you on that wording. But what I would say is this. He wants to teach people. You coming to here, you have a big rabbi of the time, and he's worried. His concern is if people are going through losses, are they going to try for learn? Say, oh, this big figure, this other famous rabbi or character, he tried to hide all these emotions and try to act like it was nothing when they lost a child. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? And he wants us to know that that's to hide those emotions and to not let them show, and to try to act as if it's nothing and it's no big deal, and to play it down. That's not the Jewish way. Not to say, it doesn't talk about, it doesn't even mention who the person was. He wants us to know that when you go through those emotions, and to say, nothing, no big deal, the guy's in a better place, it's wonderful for that person, at least, at least they're not suffering, type of thing, whatever, all those type of emotions. That's not our job to do. We're supposed to acknowledge our loss and come to terms with it, so to speak, and accept it. That's what he wants to give. Now, if you are a person that doesn't get emotions, doesn't start crying and goes through it internally, it's not a judgment on the person how we particularly do it, but it's about our lesson to ourselves that when we lose, if we go through a loss, we should go through it in a way that we're comfortable and not try to become philosophical about it. That's the idea. Prevent us from being so philosophical. And I think that's the important emphasis on these words. Don't try to over philosophize loss. Yes, you're feeling in pain. That's the idea. Okay, is that clear? That's the point of why we're bringing it. Okay, and I'll show you from the slides why we're showing you how that. So yes,
in those days, in the 1600s, there was a lot of plagues happening, and Jews didn't suffer as much as the Christians did because their hygiene was so much worse than Christian. So I think they were, not that they were used to that, but they accepted it a lot more because of, there was no antibiotics.
yeah. Okay, so that's an important point. You're right, Irene's saying that in those days people died much more often, and it was common, and it was very common that you could have 10 children that two that would survive till adulthood. It's common. That's a very valid point. The point is, this is the point, that just because it becomes normal, don't normalize death, don't trivialize death. And to say that we're going to try to trivialize death, and when you see somebody else is going through a mourning and play it down, that's what I think he's trying to do. That's the midrash. The midrash is trying to play down death, but not to make judgment on other people. And once again, I'm not arguing with, we could debate tomorrow, from today till tomorrow, about what the intention of it is. I could tell you what the intention of us bringing this text is. That's all I can tell you. Okay. So what the actual intention of the writer is not our purpose today, but to get the intention of the Torah is that we mustn't trivialize death, even as great, so to speak, as it could be. That's the idea. Okay, so let's summarize some of this, and you have this in your book on the next page. We have a text a figure 3.1, defining the kin, but we'll get to that in a moment. So the first thing, just on the board, when a loved one's passed, we feel a void that naturally translates into sadness. I don't know why my computer's just not letting me go. Oh, okay, there you go. So we have to have an allow. The first one is that the Torah allows us to mourn, seems to apply. The second one is that we're going to see there's a benefit to it, which is what the Riva, this last controversial text, is saying there's a benefit to the Torah. There's a reason why the Torah wants us to go through, because it's actually beneficial for us. And the purpose, ultimately, what he was saying is that we've got to mourn the loss of the physical life, because yes, he may be going on to a less problematic place, he or she or whatever, but ultimately, this is the ultimate. this world is the physical, is the ultimate. And therefore, the loss of life from this world is sad, whether the guy's going, hey, she is going to the most beautiful place or at all, that doesn't make a difference. The loss of physical life it should be mourned either way. Okay. Obviously, there are exceptions. We don't talk about it much, but if there was a person who was not a good person, even if they're a close relative, they were a particularly bad person, let's say the person abused, etc., those type of things, you're not obligated to go through the same mourning period. It's a separate discussion. I don't want to get into it now because it's an exception to the rule. So if you have a person that a parent that was particularly abusive or whatever, then it becomes like not necessarily do all these ideas apply. Because sometimes it could be a big relief, the passing of that person. So it's always it's just to bear that in mind as well. Okay. Yeah.
I have a friend, she didn't grow up with her dad all her life, just her mom and when the
I can't
father
get very
passed
far.
away,
With all these chairs.
to
Really?
but she
It's on the intro.
that
Mm.
connection, any connection. How that's is it something?
One second.
Oh,
Okay, 1 second. I don't think there it was.
Okay.
One second.
Yeah, and the kid. Okay.
No, 1 second. 1 second. All right.
Ties into, I mean, anyone who's adopted, really.
My apologies. I just was putting them on mute, so I didn't making sure that everyone's muted. I didn't hear your question properly. Could you repeat it?
So my friend, which I love, and she's amazing. She grew up with her mom all her life. She didn't grow up with her father. She didn't know him at all.
Yeah.
In the end, I think about 10 years ago, she was around 40. I think the auntie from the father's side called her saying that her father passed away. Can she come to the funeral? She said she didn't go in the end. She felt nothing to him. And how that's like,
Okay.
I
Interesting.
didn't judge her then, like it's her decision.
Yeah.
It was odd a little bit, but
Yeah. Well, it's an odd situation to start off with. So just for those of you that are on Zoom, Violetta gave us an example of a friend of her that was never knew her father at all. And then when she was around 40 years old, found out that her father passed away and she was asked to come to the funeral. Yeah, so that's a type of situation which I don't know all the circumstances, what's the reason, did the father not care, etc., did the father neglect her? There's so many factors, but once again, even though all these laws apply, there are exceptions that when you have a person that was abusive or didn't do good things, you're not always obligated to mourn for the lost person. It's in normal circumstances when it's more or less a healthy relationship, even though it's not perfect. I know no relationship's perfect. There's always a little bit of abuse between parent and child, right? We always,
go back.
except for this case. But
Remember that you said last week, you have that connection between the soul and the body.
yeah,
So she probably didn't have that.
oh, I don't know. It's so last week we focused on how we reflect we'll touch on it again this week, but how we reflect the mourning process. But our mourning process reflects the mourning process of the deceased. But if the person wasn't like a parent the entire life, it's difficult to say that they would be obligated in that type of thing. It's a very difficult question. I don't know the answer to that.
It doesn't mean that he was like a stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another person,
Yeah.
you know, walking.
And thinking.
And it becomes even more tricky. What happens what about the adoptive parents? Do they then
Yes,
take on
yes.
and that's another question. Do they have the same obligations for the adoptive parents? These are questions that are a bit beyond our discussion. So
About experience what you had in this life with that person. Yeah, probably I love my neighbor, but I'm not obligated to still Shiva Island.
Yeah.
But
An adoptive parent.
Parents, different.
Yeah. So I would think that you're correct, that an adoptive parent. Yeah, I would think that you're correct. Sorry?
We ask,
we'll have to look it up. The case comes up. I didn't look it up before the case. I would think that somebody that was brought up by an adoptive parent that took care of them, treated them like a parent, they would do certain elements of the Shiva, without a doubt. The only question would be whether they'd be obligated, and as in from a halachic perspective, there's a chiyuv, an obligation, that I'm not sure about. But are they allowed to? That's without a doubt, they're allowed to. And they're probably encouraged to do certain elements if they felt like that parent was a parent, just like we're saying it's healthy for a biological parent. I don't see why it would be any different for an adoptive parent as well. Okay.
Would you say that the mourning process is an expression of and respect and honor to the person who passed away?
Yes. Yes, we can say that. So the question was, could we say that the mourning process is a sign of respect to the person who passed away? Certainly, especially if there was a good, healthy relationship. And that's why we discussed this last week, why we have a longer period of mourning for a parent. Because we have a separate obligation of showing of kabed et avicha v'et imecha. But once again, it would become tricky if you were talking about an adoptive parent, a biological adoptive parent, you never had a relationship, or there was abusive relationship, or they lost contact. All those type of questions would fall into, there's a much bigger issue over there. Then, the mourning is the least of the issues. We're talking about, the severance of the relationship is really the bigger problem. And that's really what we would like to avoid in the first place, if possible. But that's a massive discussion. That's when we're talking about relationships. Okay, so of course relationships always becomes a priority in everything. We have to do whatever we can to keep relationships intact between parents and children if we can, especially young children. Once they become adults, it's a different situation. Okay. Okay, so then let's go on to how we see this from the actual practical side of Shiva. So this doesn't have the okay, so if you look on page 93, now we go through the key Jewish mourning observances. We touched on this the previous weeks, but now we're going to look at a bit more in depth. So the first time period is called Aninut. Aninut is the period that a person has just after the person passes away until the burial. So God forbid some loses. So sorry, I didn't do figure what 3.1. So that's an important one as well. Who's obligated to mourn? That's what we call next of kin, immediate relatives. So it's a parent, father or mother, child, son or daughter, spouse, or sibling. Now, if it's any other relationship, father-in-law, mother-in-law, cousin, grandparents, etc., now there's no obligation on actual mourning. If people want to, and usually, especially when it comes to like grandparents, especially if you're close with them, and even close friends, there's going to be an element of mourning, and that should be go through the type of mourning, but they don't have to tear clothes and have to sit shiva. I know a lot of people that when they have grandparents that they're close with, they usually will take off work if they could and spend most of the week in the shiva house, because they also feel that loss. But it certainly isn't the same obligation as for a parent. And when it comes to in-laws, for example, God forbid somebody's mother-in-law passes away or father-in-law passes away, and his spouse is sitting shiva. So the spouse is not supposed to do things in the house that is considered inconsiderate, both of the mourner or the person, or disrespectful to the deceased. So they shouldn't start playing music loud and start having parties, etc. But they're not necessarily obligated to sit on a low chair. They don't have to tear their garments, but they shouldn't be they can be the shopping boy. And while the rest of the person is supposed to sit at home, we're going to see, they can do that. So let's look at what actual Shiva is for these people, for these 6 core type of people. Aninut is from the moment the person passes away till the actual burial, till the kvura, the person is known as ones. This is the most intense phase of mourning. At this point, no attempt is even made to comfort or console the mourners. During this period, the next of kin are absolved from all positive mitzvahs. Examples are to pray or to put on tefillin, to say the Shema, Nothing should detract or distract from the mourner's pain and their full attention to the interment arrangement. Sometimes during the honeymoon stage, the mourners tear their outer garment as a sign of mourning. So before the burial, we try to tear, and it's done in any stage of that. In Australia and most countries, back in the day, the custom was as soon as the person passed away, we did kriya. In Australia, it's usually done just before the burial at the cemetery. That's the way we normally do it, because you're allowed to do. You have no obligations on you. So if you want to have to shower and want to change your clothes, what we're going to see is when you go to Shiva, which actually is the main time of mourning. It's actually not till page 110. If you want to get other quick look over there, it says the mirrors and pictures in the Shiva house are to remain covered for the duration of Shiva. The mourners observe the following conditions: they remain in the house of mourning. They continue wearing the garment that was torn as an act of mourning. So they wear something to that funeral, and that's what's going to be torn, and that stays on them throughout the morning. They sit in low chairs or stools. They forego the comfort of leather footwear. They shun shaving and haircuts, refrain from marital intimacy, avoid listening to music, abstain from work or business, avoid studying Torah. Okay, there are restrictions. So their undergarments they can. So the underwear, yes, but their overgarments, their shirt and pants, they don't should. So except for Shabbos. So if you have a Shabbos, unless the person passes away on Shabbos itself, and then the mourning or the burial is on Sunday, goes 7 days from the burial. But if the person passes away during the weekend, there's a Shabbos in between. The Shabbos breaks up, and then the Shabbos afternoon, just before Shabbos, short while before Shabbos, they're allowed to stop the mourning and shower and go into change into Shabbos clothes. And they're allowed to go to shul, etc., and sit on high chairs for Shabbos. But then straight after Shabbos, they go back to their mourning till the end of their Shiva period. They change back into their other clothes. Sorry. So they're not allowed to change. No, they're not supposed to change that. They're not supposed to showers. They're not supposed to shower. For 7 days, except for Shabbos. Yeah, not supposed to shower.
My mom asked.
So when it comes to showers, if you see there are restrictions, one second. When we get to see there are restrictions on bathing, showering, and wearing freshly laundered clothing, consult with the rabbi for direction. It means, obviously, if it's very hot and you're really sweaty and you really have issues with it, there are exceptions to this rule, but that's the general rule. And if you can handle it and you're not going to get really smelly and really uncomfortable, that's the best thing to do. But if it's going to get really bad for you, then you don't do it. A minyan and prayer quorum gathers in the house for the morning daily prayers. During the prayer services, the mourners recite Kaddish. Relative friends and community members visit the mourners at the Shiva house to fulfill the mitzvah of consoling the mourner and to participate in prayers, Torah study, and giving charity in the merit of the departed. Yes, what's your question?
If someone still alive.
Yes.
Example, my mom said, if I'll die, you go and shower. She gave me information. Is it okay to do that, or?
Okay, so it's
I'm not-
it's an interesting question. Okay, so there's a fascinating story of a great rabbi in the Mishnah. Says that when a person passes away, we don't shower, and then the Mishnah gives a story of a great rabbi, not just any rabbi, and he showered, he bathed, and his students asked, why are you doing it? And he says, because I'm an istinus. And what's an istinus means that I don't. That I'm very sensitive, and if I go so long without bathing and showering, I get really uncomfortable, and it's too much for me. So therefore, we learn out from there that in certain circumstances you can be lenient. Now, there's actually a custom, and I don't know if you're all aware of it, but if you go during the 9 days before Tisha B'Av to very religious circles, especially in Israel, where people are super religious and keep the law to the T the way it's always been said, we're also not supposed to shower before Tisha B'Av. It's supposed to be almost like a proper mourning. But And over there it gets hot. It's the middle of the summer, right? And it could get really hot. And people over there with their overalls. But many rabbis today say that most people today are what we would call an isthmus. It means that we're more sensitive. And therefore, during the 9 days, especially if it's hot, and especially if that, you should find exceptions. And that's why it says, even though the restriction is a blanket restriction, no showering, no bathing, but you have to be. So if your mother says to you, you shower, talk to the rabbi. But I'm saying is it's not
Talking to the rabbi.
when it happens. God, Hashem should bless your mother. She should. There's rabbis and there's rabbis. When you should talk to rabbis in the time when a need and you see what you have to do. But I've spoken to a lot of people that have gone through it, and a lot of people that want to take it seriously, even though they wouldn't do it. Like I can tell you, I don't for the whole 9 days go without showering. I do a very simple cold shower. I do it instead of every day, I'll do it every other day, etc. But I'll do it less often, much quicker, etc. So there's ways around it. You definitely should not be having a nice, warm, cozy shower. That's for sure something you should be doing.
That morning, that's your.
You're showing your.
Any relief at all.
No. No, that's not true. That's so much.
Okay.
They
All right. We can have a show just on the showering part. All right. Okay.
I don't know
So-
why they're stating on this particular point, but they taught us for Tisha B'Av, like the up to Tisha B'Av, Pardes Chana. We used to have cold shower.
Yeah. So that's right.
Showers.
Right. So the point is a shower. The point is this: a shower. That's why I say if you need a shower, have a cold, quick shower. That is it's something okay. But if you think you'll be okay, you're not too smelly. It doesn't mean you make it. Okay, here's the point. Do you want to know what the point is? That most people going into a shower is a nice warm shower is quite comfortable, especially if you haven't done it for a few days. You know when you come off a flight and you go have a shower, it's like woo. The first thing I wait to do when I get off a long flight is have a shower and brush my teeth, especially even if I've done on the plane. There's something about doing it when you get off the plane. So it's a certain comfort, and therefore, in a nice long shower on a cold day is extra comfortable. That's why we don't do that. As I say, if you have to do it, it's considered an extra pleasure that you don't necessarily do it. Obviously, longer than a week is not healthy. And in the old days, people did it weekly. And Jewish people did it on a weekly basis, which was considered above the norm, because our halacha says we have to shower every Shabbos. And if you lived in France, you maybe did it once a year if you were lucky, and then everybody else died around. That's
You did it once a month.
once a month. But Jewish people traditionally have always tried to do it if they can. They've tried to do it once a week before Shabbat, and that's saved us from different types of sicknesses, etc. So that's why it doesn't say more than a week. Right after the first week, we don't talk about restraining showers, etc. Okay. Now then, after we're going back to page 93. So this is just going over. The mourners do not work and stay in their house. Mourners sit on no stools, wear the torn garments, and don't wear any foot leather. There's a mitzvah to visit the mourners and to comfort them. Going on to the 30 days, the shloshim. After getting up from Shiva and resuming everyday routines of life, certain mourning practices are continued until 30 days from the time of burial. These include refraining from wearing new clothes, getting a haircut or shaving, and participating in festive events. So those are the type of things. It's still a mourning, but it's less. We don't have to stay home. You don't have to, but you still shouldn't be going to parties, etc. Now, so for the bottom four, the bottom four, sibling, spouse, son, and daughter, that actually ends. But for a father and a mother, then continues for 12 months. After passing of a parent, some of the shloshim mourning practices, such as not participating in festive events, or continued by the children until 12 months have passed, it is customary for the mourners to keep a candle burning for the entire 12-month period. So that we try to do the 12 months afterwards. Then afterwards, as I've said, we have the anniversary of the death. The Yortzeit is observed with the recitation of Kaddish, additional Torah study, and other good deeds in the memory of and to bring merit to the deceased. Okay, so that's going over what we do, and if you look on the board, you could see refraining from wearing new clothes, getting a haircut and shaving, participating in live music festival events, etc. And then after the other continue. Now we're going to go into. I'm wondering if the people online, if they have any questions, just unmute yourself. Okay, I can't see the chat necessarily. I saw somebody posted something in the chat before. Just unmute yourself and then remute yourself. Okay, so if you want to look, I'm not going to go into detail with figure 3.3 on page 94, that it's processing the pain. But what you can see over here is there's, once again, we're revisiting, there's a process that we go through when a person actually loses somebody. So we're told that traditionally people go through 5 stages of grief, it's known as. There was a famous, I don't know, psychologist that came up with this idea, I forgot who it is. Those 5 stages, I think, are denial, anger, give me a second, I'll tell you. I can't remember the third one, but then it goes on to anger, depression, and acceptance. We want to try to get from denial to acceptance. So the denial is I suppose, the unhealthy one. So let's look at what Judaism has in place to help us process pain on a physical basis. So if you look at text figure 3.3, it talks about the anxiety and interpersonal relationships that cause depression, and how we can, through page 94, and how the process, this, I don't want to go through this whole chart, but it's an interesting read, but how it's connected us with the person's deceased, and that mourning period is related. So that loss and grief period goes through how we can look at the other person. But I'll go through it in the other text. So let's look at now how it works on our psychology, these processes. The first part is okay. So the first part, if you look at text page 96, page 3.4, Jewish mourning observances and psychology. In track 1, we have track 1 is the relation, what our function is and how that is affecting the person that passed away. So there's 2 ways of how we look at it. So we're going to see that there's certain benefits to certain things that we do when we go through the mourning period. So there's a benefit for us and there's a benefit for the person that passed away. And that helps us keep the connection, but also allow the person to move on and allowing us to move on. So those are the 2 elements of one. We want to retain the relationship, but also move on. So if you look over here, we'll see that if you look at the stage of denial is a stage that we go through, and it's an unhealthy stage, right? We want to get over that stage as quick as possible. So Judaism has the practice of Kriya in place. You know, they tell a story of a lady that is sitting at the cricket. It's India versus Australia, and the stadium is packed. It must have been a long time ago. I don't know when the last time the stadium is packed, and there's not an empty seat, and this lady has an empty seat next to her. And she said, somebody asked her, why do you have this empty seat? He says, oh, it's for my husband, my late husband. He passed away, but we were here every game. We always came to the cricket. So I'm here at the cricket. So he says, and where's the rest of your family? Says the man. He says, oh, they're sitting Shiva. What's the point of the story? She says, sometimes, like, she hadn't got around the fact that the person had passed away, and now it was time to acknowledge the fact the person was passed away. This is very common. And sometimes people that have lost a person often say, like, I still haven't gotten my mind around it. It's a bit of a denial, and that's why sometimes people don't cry, because they're like, it doesn't make sense as a process, or it's part of shock, like some of you are saying, they're in shock or they're going through denial. So what's wrong, Margarita? You seem to be saying something about it. You shouldn't be quiet. Quiet. We're saying about how being quiet is not healthy. You got to let it out. So that's the idea, is that people go through sometimes, and often, and I see this myself in my own experience, when I lose somebody that you kind of like get your mind around it, you kind of expect the person still to be there. But that happens to others. And the acknowledgement and acceptance of the situation allows people to move on. That's the point, right? So in order to do that, you actually have to get to a point of acceptance. So let's look at this. Track 1, only a minimal function is expected that during Aninut. At this time, all one's actions are aimed at furthering the respect and honor of the deceased. We don't focus at all on ourselves. At that point, it's about focus on getting the person buried. So if you looked at Shiva, a time of limited function, usual duties and routines are suspended. Despite continuous awareness of the loss, there is a need to function and receive visitors. That's Shiva. And then how do we show the respect back to the person who's passed away? By sharing the memories of the deceased, sharpens the relationships to the deceased and deepens the awareness of what was lost. And numerous religious rituals provide merit to the deceased in the next world by saying Kaddish, by doing those prayers, all those type of things that we do in the Shiva house is also for the person that has deceased. It's almost like we dedicate the Shiva to the person. So we focus on ourselves, but also focus on the deceased. And as you see, what happens is we start to focus more on ourselves and less on the deceased as time moves on. So when you come to Shloshim, outside responsibilities resumes, with the exception of several requirements designed to mark one's mourning. So we have certain things. We haven't moved on from that person, but we could go back to our own life, to certain elements of it. We're allowed to leave the house. We don't have to sit on a low stool. We don't have to wear torn clothes. So less time is allocated to focus on the loss, although the griever continues to contemplate the loss and engage in numerous religious activities, especially the reaction of Kaddish to give merit to the deceased. And then the 12 months, same as above, with continued progress in function. And once again, we continue for the 12 months, some of the elements, but not all of them. Lessons. And then the Yortzeit is a continued awareness of the loss, but with a function at a stable level and grief function fluctuations relatively confined. And how do we see that relationship with the deceased? Actions and prayers mark the loss. Space on the calendar is provided for additional strengthening and the relationships of the relationship and the continuing bond. There's many people that have the custom that on the passing on the day of a Yortzeit to mark it, they will actually fast on that day. Yortzeit de Haskara. So some people fast, some people take the day off. I know my father, I don't know if he fasts, but I know that he on his Yortzeit, he usually takes a day off from work. He dedicates a day to doing extra study and to doing mission, etc. So we try to do like kind of dedicated day. We have to move on with our life. We don't want to forget the deceased person. So it's kind of making a balance. What? Okay. Well, Ner Neshama is something that we spoke about as well. So let's look about how we allow this process to happen in the way we're understanding. It's not a always going, it doesn't happen forever. So we talk about tearing a garment. And where's the source of tearing? In the Torah, we see it from when Yosef is kidnapped by his brothers or kidnapped by the people and sold over to Egypt. And what happens to Yaakov? When he finds out the news? Text 6, yeah. The brothers slaughtered a goat and dipped Yosef's tunic in its blood. This is from Bereshit. They sent the colored tunic home, and the couriers brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Please identify whether or not it is your son's tunic." Jacob recognized and exclaimed, "It is my son. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Jacob rent his garment, placed sackcloth on his loins, and mourned his son for many days. Now, it's an interesting example because in this case, he never actually fully recovered from his loss. And Rashi tells us the reason why Yaakov never stopped mourning is because the natural ability to overcome a loss is given only to a person that has actually lost somebody. And that's a tendency of God. But when the person's still alive and you're just away from that person, you don't have that help from heaven to get over the loss you're actually not necessarily given. And that's why Yaakov never truly got over the loss of Yosef for 22 years.
Found him again.
No one ever truly gets over any loss. I should make that clear, especially any person that they were close to. They, never get over the loss, but the hardship, the difficulty of it, so to speak, lessens a bit. So, what does that mean for us? What this means for us is that tearing a garment, it's considered a very important process of starting off the mourning process. Okay. Now, why am I saying this? Because there's a custom of late, or there's recent custom where people give out ribbons and things like that, and different funeral homes doing things like that. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is that we actually tear. Why? Let's look in text 6. Yes.
But Yaakov wasn't, we just did something that came naturally to him.
Yes. And from there we learned out that this is, but we learned about it other. We learned that Reuven did the same thing when he saw that Joseph wasn't there. So it's understood that they had this process of tearing something when they found out about the loss of the person. And that becomes a tradition for all time. So Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz states in Halachot Ktanot, chapter 116, page 98, that mourners are instructed to rend their garments as a method of distracting from and reducing their overwhelming grief. In my humble opinion, the opposite is true. Having to rend their garments brings mourners to tears and amplifies their pain. The goal is to actively encourage mourners to express their pain over the passing and to experience their tremendous loss. Okay, so, and this is more of the accepted understanding of it, which is we tear, and what you see from my experience as a rabbi, as a family member, is that when somebody passes away and you do the tearing, usually that will cause the heaviest crying since the passing of the person. It's a very heavy cry, it's very intense. And the reason for that is because it's an action. Why does something, what triggers that? And I've seen it time and time again, because it's an act of showing the loss and showing how it's real and trying to avoid the blockage of denying it, to do it in a physical action, not just by actually tearing and breaking something physical. We're doing a physical act to acknowledge it and to help us stop denial. Does it always work? Does it always stop the shock? No, but that's the halachic process. And that's what the intention of it, to make it sink in and help us avoid denial. Okay, so this is the idea, to make it tangible and an expression of the unbearable pain. So sometimes something, when it's so unbearable, to express it in actual terms becomes really difficult.
Can I ask?
1 second. And this triggers mourning for those who are numb. This is the idea, to trigger the mourning. Okay. Yes, what's your question?
I wasn't in my father passed away 3 years ago, and I couldn't go to
Funeral.
So is it, and no one actually turned my
Close.
no, do I need to do it?
Did you not do it at all?
No. Because it was COVID.
Yeah. Okay.
And we couldn't go out.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
no
So
one came to me, like I was by myself.
right. Okay. So the answer to this is that it's even if it's not COVID, throughout history, there's always been people that have lost loved ones and they couldn't make it. And our job is always to try to be there to go through the process either way. So COVID became especially for us in Australia, when we couldn't travel at all. In other parts of the world, people were still able to travel, but over here, where anyone that lost people overseas, they were stuck, as in they didn't move, and they go through the whole process by themselves. Now, even if you are able to travel, but not straight away, we tear straight away to start the mourning. So you
Do I need to
do it now, I don't think so. No, you only do it
Did
with,
you know that you need to tear it down?
No,
No.
I knew, but I knew that you do that in the.
by the funeral. That's what you thought. Okay, if you would have called,
But you know what they've done?
yeah,
They didn't tell me.
right. Okay, so if you would have called me, I would have told you, I'm saying, I'm not blaming you. I'm just telling you, people that did call me at the time, I told them that they should Shiva, and it's the worst because Shiva during COVID was a nightmare. Because when I say it's a nightmare, it's because part of the whole Shiva experience is, which we were talking about now, is for the people and the community to come be present and to do all these actions and to talk about the deceased and all those type of things, and to do it over Zoom, where and people were doing Shiva over Zoom. It was so unpersonable, but that was the situation. There's nothing you can do. So, but for those people that did go through, they were still supposed to tear, and you are supposed to Shiva.
No. I said Shiva. They actually told me a day after this for me not to express and try to.
Oh, okay.
You know? But I forced them because I knew something's wrong.
Right.
So they told me a day after, and I started to do Shiva, and I made it 1 day extra.
That's right. Yeah. So that's the right thing to do.
But
Yeah.
I
Didn't say to tear. Yeah. Okay. You don't tear now. No, no, it's okay. You don't say now, but that's fine. I'm just saying you asked the question if you should have, and I giving you the answer that. But no, you did the right thing by sitting Shiva and starting and doing the extra day. Let's watch this video, even though we're about halfway through the class. All right.
When a loved one passes away, Jewish law calls upon the immediate family to experience the rite of Shiva. Approximately 7 days are spent in mourning and receiving comfort from visitors. A doctor, a rabbi, and an acclaimed lecturer offer personal reflections on the rite of Shiva.
When someone dies, the relationship with the deceased doesn't end. The relationship with the person who died continues. It just changes from a face-to-face interpersonal relationship to a relationship of memories to a relationship of legacies. By engaging the mourners in this process, you're helping them make that shift.
The purpose of Shiva is meant for the mourner to be able to take that time aside from the affairs of life and affairs of the world, to contemplate, to introspect, and to share with others the life they had, with the person they loved. People come to visit and console and try to bring comfort to the mourner.
The structure of it and the formality of it, it gives a sense of relief. You know, when you're grieving, it's very all over the place, very hard to contain. And the structure of the Shiva brings a relief and a sense of conformity, which is quite redeeming.
If you want to help comfort the griever, what you're in essence doing by taking an interest in the person who has died is helping that person preserve his life.
I remember hearing people say things to me that was almost like they said it and the words stopped right here. But days and weeks and months later, they slowly made their way.
The point of the Shiva, to come up with anything brilliantly comforting to say, because there really isn't anything to say. Rather, it's just simply to be there.
One person who lost a toddler under very, very tragic circumstances told me what was the most comforting visit all week. And I'll say it the way he said it. He said an older gentleman with a lot of life experience came in. He said he sat in front of him and he asked to see a picture of his daughter. He gave him the picture. He looked at the picture. He cried for 10 minutes straight. He gave the picture back. He said the traditional verse that you say as you leave, and that was it. And he said that was, without a doubt, the most comforting visit.
But in retrospect, I have to say that that week of the passage between one reality and the next reality. Somehow, I have to believe, in His infinite wisdom, God saw to it that this passage not be taken alone, even while feeling lonely.
Take on a mitzvah. Do something, and it can be tiny, but I'm going to do it in memory of this person, and especially if it fits with that person. That's comforting. Now the world's a slightly better place because of that person.
So the idea is, as we're going to talk a bit about Shiva, is understanding the benefits of Shiva and why it's a healthy process, and it's layered. And I hear this from people all the time. You know, Rihanna just experienced. I would love to hear if you want to, like, you know, don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know how your experience was. I've heard a bit from you, but I hear from people all the time that whoever made Shiva, it's just the most beautiful moment. It's like you're so caught up and you don't want to see people, yet the fact that you're almost forced to come and see people and talk about the person's life, and to make, it's like, on the one hand, it gives you an ability to move on and to forget, but also to live through that person's life and to accept and to talk it over, and to and for people to come and to be there for you. That's the point of it.
I think Shiva, to feel like lost. Like everyone's coming and everyone for 7 days, and then after these 7 days you've been by yourself.
Yeah.
And then what do?
Yeah.
And you miss that person so much, and you come back.
I hear that from a lot of people, that sometimes after Shiva it's harder.
Yeah.
Because people aren't visiting as much, and
You don't have, I think, the time to think about you being in this world without the person that's missing.
That's
Because
right.
everyone's coming.
That's right.
And when everyone's
Go on.
gone, that's, I think, the hardest part.
Right, and that's when it becomes important for the close family and friends to make sure they'll be there, but also to give that time, and that person needs to go through that elements of that lonely. It's usually and often the hardest time. The first few weeks, couple of weeks after the Shiva is often a lot harder than the Shiva itself, because the Shiva is, it's just, they have to be on almost, right? Be there for people, and other people come to visit them. And it becomes really, you know, difficult afterwards because it kind of really sinks in. But before that, you don't want to just let it sink in, almost like, I feel like you got to sink in, but you got to first talk about and celebrate that person's life before you can do that. There's so much more that I want to talk about in this particular class, but we're running out of time. So I want to try to talk about just a few more elements. First thing I want to speak about is, okay, so we'll talk about the concept of moving on next week. So we'll talk about first the element of grief that people go through. So when we talk about all these elements we spoke about, the Shiva and the tearing, etc., all these are there to help us do two things: to accept the situation. So when you do it, you accept that there's been a major loss, try to make it reality. We want the Shiva, the people, to come to speak about the person, to respect that person's life, and you want to do all these things, but then you want to acknowledge that as long as you're alive, that lack and that missing will never go away. Yet, at the same time, the person wants you to move on, right? So, and wants to be happy. I heard this from a friend. I had a classmate that lost his brother, passed away. And I remember his friends, they were all young friends. It was an accident, it was very sad. And his friends were all very depressed, like they couldn't get over it. They were a very close group of friends. And I suppose also some of them had guilt because of the way it happened or certain things. And they were really struggling. And then a bunch of them actually had a dream, which is really interesting because it wasn't the family members, it was the friends that had this dream. And in the dream, the deceased came to them and said that I want you to know that by you not moving on and being so depressed as a result of what happened to me, it actually has a negative impact on me in where I am. And I want you to move on because it makes me happy. Now, that helped the friends and it helped the family member in that case. As I say, his name was Eddie Dawkin, and family friends, and one of his brothers were younger brother was in my class. But to me, that gave a lot of perspective. On the one hand, the deceased stays connected to you, but they don't want you to be burdened by their loss, by the fact that you haven't lost them. So we feel like we want to hold on to that connection. And if we move on with our life, we're ruining our connection, our relationship with that person. Actually, the person, this is the way I understand it, the person feels the opposite, that they're causing you to be depressed. They're causing you to hold back on life, and they're holding you back from moving on. And that's what that makes them sad. But when they see that the person is moving on, and that's why the beautiful things that you hear over here about people saying do something in their memory. Their life isn't over. Their life continues. But when you do something to continue a legacy, but they are now bringing more goodness into the world as a result of their loss, that's the healthy way to go about it. But when it causes you to stagnate your life and not to move on and to get caught up, that doesn't bring them happiness. Okay? And that's the important point over here. So it's actually an interesting article, which I think is at the big back of the book and from Reddit. But it's an article, interesting article. I never read it, but somebody mentioned it. And that is, the idea of the article is that when people lose somebody, they go through stages of grief. It's like waves. And at the beginning, anything could trigger. Anything could happen. And you could be walking down the street and you could see something and it triggers a memory. And boom, you could be like, it could break you down for the day. And that happens very often at the beginning. And what happens is it starts happening less and less, and the waves become smaller and smaller. And that's a healthy way of getting over. But what sometimes happens to people when that type of process happens is they start to feel guilty. That why am I not feeling that pain? And that pain that I should be having and that mourning over the loss, I should be feeling. And they start to be upset that they're not feeling it anymore. And that's the point, that yes, the pain comes at the beginning, but don't say that because you're no longer feeling the pain as it goes on, that's not healthy. No, that's normal. You go through the heavy pain at the beginning, but then you should start to feel less and less, even if it was something you're very close with, and that's healthy. And if you're still years later, still feeling very strong pain and being totally overwhelmed, then, certainly we're talking about serious things. You've got to see bereavement counselors and all those type of things. Even for a minor case, you might need that. But that's not a healthy way of living, and we do have to move on to a certain degree and to acknowledge that it's also good for the deceased. Yes.
Why when people come to some people in their belief with messages, or like people say, they sense to go about these either relationship with the people.
Yeah.
I never get anyone come.
I don't know the answer to that question. I know. As Hasidim of the Rebbe, it's one thing to talk about it with a family member, but it's interesting at Hasidim of the Rebbe. A lot of us sometimes even feel really close to the Rebbe as like a parent, and you're talking about thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe even more people that feel such a close connection. Talking about people that were alive, around or close before the Rebbe passed away. And then people speak about having dreams or the Rebbe coming to them, and it makes people jealous. So here's the same person, the same relationship. I don't have the answer to this. Obviously, the Rebbe, the person that passed away, whatever it is, feels that it was appropriate for that person, or maybe they were struggling so much as a result of whatever that person was going through that they felt the need to come back to that person. We actually believe, and this is a side point, that when a deceased person comes back, they come back for an important reason, because I won't just come back. So either because they're really in pain and they have to send up a message, or because they feel like they have something really important to tell you. But if there's no, like, if it's not really important, they're not going to just come and appear, because that's part of them moving on. They don't want to come back into this world if they don't have to, because they kind of want you to move on and be a person, not in that type of way. I'm not saying there's anything wrong if they do come and people do have visions. The main thing is, if they do come, as I said to you, don't ever go with them if they tell you to go with them. That's the main thing. There has been stories of people that have been asking. Now, as I say, there's a lot more to say. I've kind of done more than half the class, about 2/3 of the class today. So what we'll do next week is we'll continue on this class. I'll probably be able to, depending on the questions, and I'll probably be able to go through most of the rest of the class much quicker. We'll talk about Kaddish, and we talk about what's the meaning of the statements that we say at Shiva and things like that. But if we have time, we'll start the next class again, which is really fascinating, because we actually then go back to the afterlife and talk about what the soul goes through in the afterlife. Okay, so we have about 2 or 3 classes on that as well.
Listen, we have their whole year.
The whole year. Is anybody rushed? So next week we have to take it. That's right. Next week we'll do one more class before Pesach. Okay. Yeah. So that's our end of our class for tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Esther. Apologize if there was somebody online that wanted to ask a question. Please do so. You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Very good. Good night.
Good night, Jochanan. Good night, Maria.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.